listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Animation Podcast. I'm Alex Sargent.
And I'm Chris Holliday.
Welcome back for another new year of fantasy animation gifts and treats for you. And we're going to start off with something current, something contemporary. Yep. There's been award nominations. There's been box office records broken. We're here to talk about Wicked, the 2024 fantasy musical, still playing at cinemas, I suspect, right now, although we're recording this a little bit in the past, but still playing in cinemas, at least in our perspective. Nominal prequel to The Wizard of Oz, so plenty of Wizard of Oz references this week, and part one of a two-part extravaganza adapting both the very successful Broadway and West End stage musical and the equally successful, although in perhaps different and competing ways, book by Gregory Maguire, Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West. I'm very excited. I've been a fan of the stage show for years, and I thought the film was good. To spoiler alert it, but I'm sitting across from my curmudgeonly animation expert here, who I know is not necessarily on board on the Wicked train. So, Chris, how are you feeling? Are you apprehensive about the next hour or so?
Well, first of all, when you said we were doing Wicked, I went away and watched the 1998 American thriller Wicked, starring Julia Stiles as a disturbed teenage girl that went straight to DVD in 2001.
Yes. So, in many ways, the first adaptation of the Maguire novel.
And best. So I watched that, and then I realised that we were doing the other Wicked. Now, I have seen the stage show, and it turns out, having watched the film, either the film doesn't adapt. One of two things is true. Either the film doesn't adapt the stage show directly, or I've forgotten everything about the stage show. And I feel like it's the latter.
I think it's more the latter than the former.
Okay. So, yes, I saw it and have some... I was put in a good mood at the start with the old-style Universal Pictures logo, so I was off and running. I love an amended logo. I love it when films do things with the logos, and I love that sort of nostalgic, the old Universal 20th century. So, and I enjoyed the film, but I sort of... And I don't know how I found it sound like my parents. I wouldn't want to see it again, which is their way of telling me to not buy it for them on DVD.
Sure.
But I will. I thought it was interesting. It did lots of really interesting things, and I'm really interested to talk to you about the tone of the film, because there were parts I thought were really funny and self-reflexive, and then I thought there were parts that were really earnest. And I'm trying to make sense. of the really obvious racial politics of the film. And I can't figure out whether it's so obvious whether it's a really obvious film, as musicals often are, very kind of presentational and very sort of exhibitionist and very on the quote-unquote surface in that sense, or whether it's doing something cleverer than that, whether it's doing a kind of doubling of things. So I'm interested in that element of the film, and obviously the general discussion around what it is about the Wizard of Oz kind of world or mythology that seems to lend itself so well to just visual spectacle. Like, it's obviously, I mean, you must be delighted insofar as it's taking what the original the Wizard of Oz as a technical, a spectacle, kind of doing with form and style and music, and sort of just amping that up to this lavish rainbow visual spectacle. So I have some notes, and I'm sort of interested in the relationship between style and substance, and I guess in this film, style as substance. Maybe that's a good way.
Interesting. Well, should we start with all that then? Well, why don't we start with the Oz mythology more broadly, and then we can get into the kind of specifics of the movie and Wicked as a kind of entity.
I feel like this is
mythology.
You can
we take it away?
I'll hand this over to you, because again, I'd forgotten lots about the film. I forgot lots about the stage show, and then when I was watching the film, I thought, oh yeah, so it's after. I was literally Googling, going, so hang on, so it's after. Oh no, they're going back in time, and okay. So I was trying to work out where this fits in with the mythology and so forth. So take it away.
Oh, okay. Well, we can do that. So obviously, it is a prequel slash one of these. What do they call them?
Mid-quel?
Mid-quels.
Something like that. Yeah.
But what we're talking about today is essentially the first act of the stage show.
Yes, it is. Yes.
The first half up until the interval. It literally ends on the kind of same note that the interval ends on. And I will caveat all the praise I'm going to leap on this movie, because I did enjoy it and I think it is really good, with the fact that I think Wicked, the play, the musical, has significant second act issues. So I guess I was bound to like this because it's the best bits of what I think is a flawed but good show. So it tells us. So what we're talking about today is essentially a prequel. What the second half of the show will be is a kind of midquel. Things happening alongside the original movie. We get references to Dorothy. We get references to we get a few of them in here, but we get the events playing out in the kind of classic Wizard of Oz story. To that, but we'll part that for this discussion. So what this is an odd. Well, I guess this is perhaps the most successful attempt to update the Oz mythology since Oz itself. So The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum, really a best-selling novel when it first comes out at the turn of the 20th century. He writes a series of Oz books that are popular but not quite as popular as the original, and they kind of limp out and do okay with readers. There are stage show adaptations almost immediately, and as you say, there is this kind of acknowledgement or kind of awareness that the book lends itself to visual spectacle very aptly, and this is something that L. Frank Baum, the writer of Wizard of Oz, also knew. I mean, he immediately kind of went into the stage show business. He actually set up a very short-lived film production company in the sort of 1910s, making short films based in the world of Oz. But so to an extent, you're very right. But actually, it's been quite a troubled history of trying to make new versions of The Wizard of Oz, or new versions set in the land of Oz.
Yes.
There are more flops than there are success stories in this wider story. So L. Frank Baum indeed almost went bankrupt by trying to make kind of more Oz tales and expecting them to do very, very well. There was, of course, Disney's Return to Oz in the 1980s, which I think is a very interesting and quite cherished movie now amongst some audience members, but didn't do well at its release.
So this is 1985. This is the dark fantasy Return to Oz. Is this the first of the Oz films since 1939?
Well, then there's The Wiz, of course.
Of course, Ease on Down the Road,
which was popular, but didn't quite capture the success of the original. It didn't have that kind of mainstream, but popular. That one certainly works. Yeah. Then there's The Return to Oz. There was a
James Franco one.
Yeah.
Oz Great and the Powerful,
which didn't do well and underperformed, and is essentially Wicked. But not Wicked.
If Wicked started sort of half an hour earlier, it would be,
and with a different story, right? And a different it's not adapted from the Maguire novel. It's just an origin story about the Wicked Witch of the West and Good Witch of the East, and
Oz. The Wizard kind of coming into being.
There's some interesting elements of it. There are some things taken from some of the Oz secondary books in that are quite fun. There's a kind of porcelain girl character that's quite well adapted into CGI, but the film didn't do well, critically or commercially. So it's not the case that, hey, do an Oz film, it'll definitely work out. But whilst all that's been happening, we've had this Wicked phenomenon. So we've had the novel, which was a modest success, but not it didn't quite do the work it did. Then we've had the stage show by Stephen Schwartz, adapted from this quite kind of punky, satirical, the text into a kind of big, bougie Broadway musical, kind of ironing out some of the more kind of difficult or subversive elements of the original and kind of keeping the basic strand of it, and that's been playing solidly. I think it's isn't it like the second highest grossing Broadway show of all time or something like that. So it's been this behemoth success.
And so that's the last 20. So to get my timeline. So the novel, the Wicked novel by Maguire, is 1995, mid-90s, and then you have this stage adaptation, which is that sort of is premiering in 2003, October. Yes, Gershwin Theatre, October 2003, after completing some pre-Broadway tryouts. Fine. And that's the cast. So that's the Idina Menzel, Kristin Chenoweth. So
that's right.
So that, and I've seen it when it transferred to London. So this is, it's again one of those films which is adapting a film from a play. And obviously, this is in terms of recent, let's say, taking a tour around London and seeing the kinds of plays that are, and the musicals that are up on stage, it's not a lot of them. I mean, we're speaking. I don't know whether Disney's Hercules is about to come out, has come out.
Yeah, sure.
So this is this is film now taking back from theatre and doing theatre on screen.
Yes, so to finish the story, then we can talk about the film itself. It sort of was in, I don't know about development hell, but sort of just stating as a film adaptation for quite a while. Various actors have been attached to it. I think one of the reasons, although I'm speculating a little bit, is that there's always been quite a lot of thorny rights issues surrounding The Wizard of Oz, because a long time ago there was a split between the rights to the Baum novels, because I said there are multiple. So at one point, in fact, for most of its history, some companies have owned the rights to adapt Oz stories, and some people have owned the rights to the film, the 1939 film of The Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
So then we get into complicated legal. So, example, the easiest thing to understand the problem here is that there are no ruby slippers in the original novel, but they looked better on screen. That's the famous sort of story. So they changed them in the script of the 1939 one to be the ruby slippers. Now everyone thinks they're ruby slippers. So there was a very long time where you could make an Oz movie, but you couldn't put ruby slippers in it, because it's a bit like, to get our Bond reference in nice and early, it's never say never again. Okay. Yeah, you can make a Bond film, but you can't have a gun barrel, because that's a Bond. That's an Eon Bond film thing you're riffing on here. Yes. But you can make a story about a character called James Bond who's a spy.
Yes,
that happened for ages.
Okay, I feel like there's always a line in the credits based on characters developed by.
Exactly.
Which is yes.
So I don't know how they've solved that. I haven't gone into look into that, but either they've clearly solved that, probably with the MGM kind of recent kind of collapse. Might have had something to do with it, right?
Yep.
But I could be speaking out of turn there, and that will become obviously more significant in the second half because of when we get part 2, because that's when we get your Dorothy's, and they can use and lean into the iconography of the film more than perhaps they could have originally.
Okay, so the second part of we are doing Wicked Part 1.
Yes,
that ends with a to be continued.
Yes,
I can't remember the second half of Wicked on stage.
Yes,
but so just you're saying Dorothy appears in Wicked.
It's like Pulp Fiction. Sort of Dorothy. Who's that character? There's a lot of bits of you've just arrived. There was this girl here called.
Okay.
A lot of that going on. I think she does appear in it, but if she has lines, there's very few lines. She's over there in the corner, whilst the others, we see the camera. We are seeing The Wizard of Oz with the camera just tilted slightly to see what was going on.
But it's not. We can't name the name's James Bond.
Okay. So I suspect they've now fixed that, which is why it's come to the screen now. I mean, the other thing, obviously, is that there's always that negotiation about when do you make a musical, because when do you make an adaptation of the musical, because there's a worry that it'll take away from people going to see the actual...
Split your audience. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I suspect a lot of that's going on. So here we are. We're in 2024. We've got a version of it.
And no one is remembering Cats anymore. No one remembers the perils of maybe adapting something for the big screen using CGI.
Yeah.
We've forgotten that. That was a pre-COVID thing.
Right.
Now this is to me, this feels, there are certain films after kind of COVID which feels, obviously, after COVID as a concept, but certain big screen hits that come along. I'd say that the second Top Gun is a good example. This feels like one of those get you back to the cinema films.
Yes.
There's definitely that sort of...
And it certainly seems to be working.
Yeah.
I was in a packed cinema when I saw this, and actually got a round of applause at the end, which, I'm not...
Who are these people?
I don't want to... but it's always nice when a film... it doesn't really matter what the film is. It's always nice, I think, when a film gets a round of applause in the cinema. There's something...
Sure.
For me, nice about that. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So maybe we should start there then, in terms of the film's success or not success, maybe, at using CGI, using visual effects to create the land of Oz.
I didn't notice any.
You didn't notice any? Yeah.
No,
because obviously that's the thing that when you come to adapt a stage show, you go, right, that's the thing we can add to this, right? That's the thing we can bring to this. Do you want to start as our resident
Sure.
CGI expert on what you thought that did or did not do to any of the film's kind of tonal or narrative registers?
So there is so much of the film, and again, reading around the film, there's a lot of the director, John M. Chu, sort of saying, we wanted to do this for real. It's not all green screen. It's not okay. So there's part of an interest in a film like this for me is to disentangle the top-down industry rhetoric, the IMDb trivia page from the actually the mechanics of how this is being produced. And obviously, I think one of the So the interesting thing for me, I mean, it actually starts in the opening. So, of course, yes, you have this old-style Universal Pictures logo, and then it says, Land of Oz, a wonderful place where magic is real, which reminds me of things that you've said to me about fantasy exists.
Sure.
So magic is real. And the film, because the film begins essentially at the end of The Wizard of Oz, pretty much, i.e. the Ding Dong, the Witch is dead, and the flying monkeys are off and running, and you do have a brief little glimpse of Dorothy et al. Walking up the yellow brick road,
and they're clearly riffing on the old set of the Munchkin Land,
which is established by the old style Universal Pictures logo. So that I thought worked really well, and then the film takes us back to basically Glinda saying, Ariana Grande is saying, well, Elphaba was a lot more complex than that, and then the film goes back to, but. It was the first appearance of the flying monkeys was the thing where I thought, okay, so movement here. It's all done in one sweeping, digitally enhanced long take. And of course, listeners of the podcast, I love a long take, but I also love a digital long take. And again, lots of writers have talked about sort of post-humanist cinema, a cinema that's dislocated from human subject positioning, that we can now Google Earth style. We can, borrowing from aesthetics of the swipe, we can now inhabit spaces in different kinds of ways. And of course the flying monkeys are themselves CGI, but the point of view perspectives, the virtualness of their movement is something that obviously one of the big things, and this goes back to the 1900s, the difference between cinema being canned theatre and actually cinema being cinema and doing movement and doing mobility and stuff. And because cameras are not plugged in, or you're not recording on disc, let's say, in the same way as with regards to synchronized sound, you get a lot more flexibility in where the camera can go and stuff like this. So a similar process is happening here with the CGI. The thing that cinema and digitally enhanced spectacle can do that you can't do on stage is, of course, mobility and inhabit the space. And you get it at the end and at the beginning of the film. So you get the beginning with the flying monkeys, and you're seeing this expanse of digital space. And then at the very, very end, where you get your defying gravity, and she's often flying round, and the camera is defying gravity. There's a deliberate sort of, and again, this is your blog post: defying gravity, digital spectacle and virtual camera work. So I thought that the idea of virtual camera work right at the start was being like, oh, we're really opening out the world of Oz, just in the way that the prequel narratively does. It opens out the film, but the digital camera is opening out the fictional world of Oz.
Yeah, I was struck by the camera. It's interesting we're starting there. I was struck by that, and I was thinking, because I'm doing something not to do with this podcast, but it means I'm rereading quite a lot of I know, reading a little bit more of rereading quite a lot of Bazin, Andre Bazin, and I'm like, are we now at the point where the long take no longer has any signification with realism anymore? And actually it's come to the point where actually it's doing something. It's not just like not doing something, it's doing something else. And within this movie, it did seem to be this kind of declaration of its own impossibility through the gaze of the camera, right? This camera, through the physics or lack of physics of where it goes, how it shoots, who it can follow, how high it can climb, is embodying the kind of, Oz, a place where magic is possible. It's baked into the kind of filmmaking style, which is a really interesting thing to think about, because now we're in a world where kind of ocularity means going beyond possibility.
Yes. I suppose there's lots I could say about, writers like William Brown talking of this post-humanist cinema. He gives this excellent, which I used to show to the students, which is the opening, I think, to the second X-Men, where the long take, digitally assisted long take, has implications for editing, because you are doing it's the most edited insofar as it's digital, but it also gives the impression that there are no edits. And of course, whether it's your opening to your Bond film, it's Spectre, or it's a camera that passes impossibly through something. The idea of the long take, as it is digitally understood, is doing something in terms of as you say, with spectacle and signalling our relationship to space. And I suppose what's interesting about this film is that it doesn't have that transition from Kansas to Oz, because it's all in Oz. There's no opportunity, certainly from a scholarly perspective, to be like, okay, so formally, what is it about the camera work in Oz that's different to the camera work in the way that other spaces are being registered? Because it's all in Oz. You're thrown right into the centre of all of this chaos.
Immersive, not Portal Quest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you writing that down?
Yeah, well, I have to write the blurbs, don't I? But I would say, the idea of a post-humanist cinema, a cinema that is dislocated from from human subject. Yeah. Like it's non-anthropocentric. That's essentially.
Well, you see, I didn't think about it in those terms. I thought about it more in terms of kind of just like it's non-logocentric.
Yeah,
like it's nothing to do with logic or plausibility or gravity. To use that pun again, the space is now impossible.
Yes.
We are in impossible spaces, in a way that is embedded within the camera design. So it could be post-human. I'm just sort of not really going there or not going there. I just thought about it more in terms of like, I guess, Brown's super cinema. If this is super cinematic, what we're looking at, that means we need to remember that cinema, therefore, whatever cinema is, it's something that isn't expressing any tangential link to physical reality. So we're very anti-Bazin now. Cinema, because Bazin would say cinema is the link to the real.
Yeah, and obviously he's right.
So super cinema wouldn't work to describe that.
Yeah, well,
you're back, and I'm not saying Brown is doing this, but it requires us to take a very different. What do we mean by cinematic that is becoming super?
Yes,
is it that cinema? Because I would argue this cinema's always been quite good at kind of evoking impossible spaces, invoking spaces and movements and times beyond the everyday and the real.
Yes,
and it's just making that even more. It's bringing that even more into being.
I suppose for Brown. I mean, so this is he wrote a piece on post-humanist. The title of the chapter is something like "Man Without Movies" or "Movies Without Men." So it's about the camera. His work on super cinema is more about the visibility, and we've talked about this before: the visibility of special effects, whether or not it is. Films are often Superman pretending to be Clark Kent rather than Bruce Wayne pretending to be Batman. They are more. They are super that try to be not super. But this film is not that. This film is super trying to be super.
Yes.
And obviously Bazin himself writing about the long take in neorealism. So we're not just talking about ontology of the photographic image. This is neorealist cinema where you have freedom. It's a lot of post-war cinemas: Germany, Italy, France. Thinking about terms that were created or terms that French scholars used to describe films like The 400 Blows. So plan séquence, temps mort, dead time. We are just watching things in their duration.
Yeah.
So this is again the idea of the digital long take. You don't watch these things going, oh, this long take is happening with a fidelity to time and space, because it's digital. It's not fidelity to any of those things. It's more spectacular, and you're not watching this thinking, oh, these things are happening in real time and I'm watching them as they are happening. It's more as the camera work is moving. It's now in service of world creation and horizon and spectacle. And
I was going to ask you about that, because obviously one of the things that Bazin talks about when he talks about long takes is like and like depth of field and all this kind of stuff, is this idea of the thing beyond the lens, or the bits in the corner, or the character standing with his feet out of the shot, but giving the sense of the world that the film is capturing, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know, what do you think about the way in which these things are being used in terms of world building? Because I think you and I have a slightly different take on world building sometimes on this podcast. So I'd be interested to hear, is this a successful example of world building, given that it's trying to kind of literally add something to the understanding of Oz?
Yes, I haven't really thought about this.
Or does these flourishes, this kind of spectacle, get in the way of its ability?
It's a good question. I think my first the gut reaction, if I was doing a first draft, writing something, sure, I would say yes, we are seeing more. As Victor Perkins would say, there is always more in the world that the sort of camera can capture. That's why the most interesting thing of Rear Window is not what's happening in the individual apartments. It's the bottom left alleyway where people are walking past.
Yes.
And that tells you that it's a world, because there's stuff happening that you can't see and things that you don't see. And again, I think James McDowell has written about this in relation to Rear Window, what we don't see in the chapters called What We Don't See and What We Think It Means, which is the foundation of world.
So I guess the kind of camera gestures we're talking about, the flourish of them seem to be saying, I can show you everything.
Exactly. I can show you the world, as it were.
A different musical.
A whole new world, world building. No, but I think there's... So my first answer is yes, we are seeing parts of the world, like open world video games, that you're seeing parts of things that the camera's not going to dwell on. And again, writers on world building would say if you're flying through the world and you see some ruins, it tells you that the world, we're not going to the ruins, but they're just over there on the horizon. ruins tell you that the fictional world has a history in it, and are they crumbling? Are they ruins because that's just how time works, or are they ruins because they're the subject of a war? What do people fight about? Religion? They fight about politics. So you sort of can build the world from the fragments. Victor Perkins calls this the data of relevant data. But in this case, so yeah, I think there is the sense that the camera is revealing elements of the world that we're not going to see. But I feel like there's also it also gets in the way because there's no real sense of it as a world.
Yes.
In some sense, it's more fictional than it is a world.
Well, or it's a fictional world.
Yeah, but I don't think it's not necessarily. I don't think the camera work is there to show you the different parts of a world that we're not seeing. But hey, if we just shifted the camera, that town over there there's a story to tell there, and I don't think it's doing that sort of. That's not the purpose of these kinds of sequences.
So this is where. I'm thinking back to our conversations about Lewis and the kind of imagistic nature of his kind of world building versus Tolkien, the kind of very meticulous sub-creation thing. And the more I've dwelled on those conversations, I think I'm more in the Lewis camp. Or at least I think that's one of the reasons Oz is, as in the 1939 world, is so captivating, and one of the reasons why it's so hard to embellish and add to and kind of create some sense of order out of. And there's been some writing on this. I can't cite any individual scholars because I haven't got them to hand, but there's been quite a lot of writing on this, on about like Baum's interest in kind of train travel and modern technology in the world. And like, if you think about the way The Wizard of Oz as a novel and as a film structures, it's kind of like it's very both theatrical and very kind of train-like, in that it goes from stop to stop and it kind of skips through the rest. So when you picture the world of Oz, you picture Munchkin Village, the woods, Emerald City. You don't picture the spaces in between quite as much. No. As much as it is a world, a travel movie, the travel is all about direction from one place to another. It's not about dwelling in the spaces in between, which is more what a sort of Tolkien world is. So in that respect, I kind of liked that about... If I think about what this film, what Wicked adds to the impression I have of Oz, I picture that kind of, the sort of, courtyard of shiz that we spend most of our time in, right? In the university setting, or indeed the Emerald City. But I'm not picturing, I'm not mapping it well, but I'm not sure that's the vitality of the world of Oz. Oz is a space that's a bit like a train journey. You kind of stop in these places and then you whiz past the next place, and then you land in the next place and then you whiz past it. So
you ease on down the road.
Part of the magic of it is its freeness of space, its floatingness of space.
So it's as Perkins would say, it's not worlded in the same way. There is a sort of retreat from the kinds of Tolkien-esque details that flesh everything out, every possible iterative. This is a lot more painted with a broader brush. Well, that doesn't decrease its world.
Yeah, and it's kind of making a world that doesn't work like our world, right? It doesn't. It's not. In a bit like what you're saying about the long take, or like cameras having to be kind of artificially made to be like a human.
Yeah.
There's no reason a fictional world has to have space that is logic like ours. It doesn't have to be mapped to be cohesive.
This is the debate between different animation styles. This is exactly the debate that Wells has between, although I think having spoken to him, he's sort of interested in revising these categories, but the difference between orthodox animation and experimental. So orthodox animation is your Disney, and experimental animation is a bit more interpretive. It plays with sound and image. But the point is that, and again, a lot of criticism of Disney films were that it took this expansive and expressive and creative medium and cut it from the same cloth as live action cinema. But experimental animation is not incoherent. There's a cohesive. It's not figurative, and it doesn't have characters. But there's still a sort of there's a way of reading logic into it, that there's a suggestion of a fictional world, and even the most perhaps figurative or experimental. So yeah, I think so. There's something interesting about what you're saying.
Hi everyone, it's Alex here, just interrupting the podcast for a moment. Apologies, we'll get back to the scintillating conversation in just a second. I'm interrupting it with just a little bit of admin and a little bit of a plea to listeners, because we need your help, frankly. We have been running the podcast now for quite a few years. We're very happy running the podcast. We are thrilled by the amount of listeners we get. Always have been, always will be, and it's always growing, and it's always a really wonderful community out there. So thank you so much for listening. But the podcast doesn't do itself on its own. It requires Chris and I's time, and it also requires a bit of cash injected into it. I'm not asking for donations in this little plug here, but I am asking for your help to make sure we keep the podcast going on a financially sustainable and sort of time sustainable place. For example, right, there are hosting fees to pay. Okay, that's a couple of £100 each year. There's things like tech and cables. You might have heard a few episodes where Chris and I sound a bit echoey. That's because one of our cables broke and we had to find a way of replacing it and paying for it. And frankly, one of the things we're trying not to do is use our own money or our own pocket, our own wages, frankly, as full-time academics to pay for this stuff. We'd rather try and find alternative ways of funding it. Now, we have done that in the past and we'll continue to do that. We have no plans to introduce membership fees. We have no plans to start trying to sell you guys merch or asking you to go onto Patreon pages or anything like that. We want to keep this a free, easily accessible, educational resource which we're proud to produce and we're really pleased that we are producing. So all we need from you is just a little bit of more help in terms of helping us to showcase the value of this podcast to some of the people that might pay for it. Okay, so the way you can do this is like a couple of different ways. One, subscribe. Okay, if you're not already subscribed to the podcast on whatever platform you're downloading this from, please subscribe now. Those figures really help us. Second, review the podcast on any kind of platform, okay? A star review is helpful. Written reviews are even better, okay? If you haven't done one of them and you listen to our show and you think it's valuable, please take 3 seconds out of your day, just write a couple of sentences about what the podcast does for you, why you like it, and share that on the platform. That really, really helps. Third, share it with your friends. Share it on social media when you see a new episode being launched, okay? It helps increase the visibility. Hopefully more people can get it and access it too. That's really, really helpful. Finally, and this is a good one, this would actually be really, really helpful, is email us if you use the podcast in any kind of setting, okay? Whether you're an individual that just finds it useful, tell us why it's useful, particularly on an educational level. What have you learned from the podcast? What do you find that's valuable? What value has it brought to your life? Or what impact has it made on your life? I know that kind of sounds very lofty, but if you can just put the kind of simple, real-world changes that you've made, some things that how has it helped you approach the study of fantasy animation differently, anything like that, you can email us. That would let us know. If you're an educator and you use this podcast either to teach students or as part of your own research or as a way of inspiring further thought, let us know exactly how, some of the specifics. Maybe there's a course you have it subscribed to. Let us know. We know of some of you out there. We've worked with you in the past, but if you whether we've worked with you or not, please drop us that email. Really, really helpful. And you can do that at fananimresearch, FANANIM research @gmail.com. Basically, we can fund this podcast through various ways through our own network, but what we need from you is evidence that the podcast is doing something out there in the world. It could be doing something small and sort of not very tangible, like helping you to enjoy fantasy and animation movies. Great, tell us how. That's really, really useful, but we need the evidence for it. Or it could be, helping teachers, helping practitioners. Are you a company out there that set it on your training session? Anything like that. We know of you people out there. We find you in various different ways, but it'd be really helpful if you could come to us so that we can gather that data as we approach another round of kind of scrape together some cash to keep the lights on. Okay, it's not much. Yeah, it only costs us I don't know, £400 or £500 a year to keep this thing going. We think we give a lot of time to the podcast. Hopefully you'll think that's a reasonable exchange. We give that time often outside our full-time jobs. We're just looking to kind of find ways of boosting our case to get the funding out there elsewhere. So no Patreons, no merch, I'm afraid. But if you could help us in those ways, share, subscribe, review, or email us with your stories, that would be very helpful. The email address again is fananimresearch, FANANIM research @gmail.com. Let's get back to the show. Right, so we're in Munchkin Square.
So yes.
We get the arrival of the kind of seminal kind of pink bubble. The arrival of Glinda, played by Ariana Grande, and we get the kind of opening song, and as you say, we jump into the kind of the story of Elphaba, who is the main character in this film, played by Cynthia Erivo, and we start seeing her childhood. She's born green.
Yeah.
No one really knows why, but it's got something to do with an extramarital affair and some sort of potion. We'll leave that for now.
I can't remember the play, but I just feel like I wonder who the travelling salesman is.
Yes, well, quite.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard what the travelling salesman sounds like, and I've watched the rest of the film.
It's a bit like Jeff Goldblum.
He sounds a lot like Jeff Goldblum.
But anyway, I suspect we're gonna get. Here's a bet for part 2. We're gonna get a scene with a digitally de-aged Jeff Goldblum, and that'll be just for you.
That will be just for me. We'll do the second episode, second part.
And one of our colleagues, Fern Parsons, who also is aware. So shout out to Fern on that. But yes, yes. So we see her childhood. Is this where you would like to talk about racial politics, or should we leave that for a more sunnier climate?
Well, no, we can do it. I'm sort of intrigued by it because I think there's an obviousness that has to be acknowledged, but I think the film is doing more than that. So there's been a lot of writing. I mean, there are 2 ways that we could go with this. One is the trigger warning that the BBFC placed on the film with regards to discrimination. This includes images of discrimination. Right?
Okay.
So this is a widely discussed, and I wasn't aware of this, but I was kind of thinking about the film in terms of its racial politics. But there are lots of online sources that are sort of up in arms. Well, some are more up in arms than others, depending on the website. But the fact that the film is all about discrimination based on colour, there is I don't agree with the term trigger warnings, but the idea of flagging something about the film and its the notion of colour, the role that colour plays. So there's that side, and then of course there's the film's casting practices in and of itself. So I don't know whether this is the first time that Elphaba is played by a person of colour. I don't know whether this is the first time.
I would have to check a whole legion, but largely I would say the majority it's been white. Obviously, Indina Menzel is the one who originated the character.
So there's a sort of the easy equivalence to make, and I think this goes back. There are lots and lots of writers that talk, and I'm interested in this, having just written something on Shrek. So Brady Hammond has written an article that talks about the Shrek films and its register of racialization, that sort of says the dark skin of the black others, which is his quote, builds on persistent historical associations throughout film history between greenness and like non-white otherness. And Shrek is, quote, one of the green skin characters that are presented as fantasy creatures but instead are proxies for black American stereotypes. So that is then, and my argument with regards to the Shrek is that it's obviously the donkey for lots and lots of reasons, but one can't negate the otherness of a character like Shrek and what his greenness plays. In this case, the racial politics of the film are exacerbated or intensified because of Cynthia Erivo and her casting as Elphaba. But it also seems too flippant and too obvious, and I've put in my notes too easy, to equate greenness and blackness. There's lots of discussions around, she says at one point, as you can see, she's a perfectly acceptable colour when talking about her sister. And there are lots of other instances. The pronunciation, there's a discussion around the pronunciation of white names, which I thought was interesting, which if you're in a classroom or an educator, and this idea of students, international students feeling like they have to westernise their names, and it's like, well, if I can pronounce Phoebe, I can probably pronounce whatever your name is. So I thought there was some interesting stuff around pronunciation, and so there's something interesting about the film, and I haven't figured it out whether or not it's obvious and just saying, the film is about discrimination and practices of prejudice in a supposedly post-racial, or not post-racial, but this is a film that is on the cusp of Trump's re-election. There's something interesting about, is the film doing some of that intellectual work around race, or is it one level removed? I think that's what I'm trying to figure out, whether it's one level removed and it's a comment on the way that otherness is represented in films and the way that people talk about this. Because what's more interesting to me in the film is, to me, it's about Glinda's white privilege. She says something like, she says something like, something is very wrong, I didn't get my way. She said, and there's lots of instances where so I think the film is more about whiteness than the equation between green and blackness, and I haven't quite figured out what's interesting about that per se.
I think it's about normativity.
Yes.
Right, and the privilege of normativity. I think my tentative answer to that is, I think casting Cynthia Erivo adds a more declared racial
it doesn't
element.
not do race. Yes.
But I think within the structure of this film and the story as well, and again, this is kind of taking something that was embedded somewhere in the original tale. There is this kind of there are lots of minorities targeted and commented upon, right?
Yep.
You know, so we have obviously Elphaba's sister, whose name escapes me, Nessa Rose, who's in a wheelchair.
Yep.
She is discriminated with again. She's discriminated against in a more kind of quiet, everyday. I don't think there's a scene, unless I've missed it, where anyone kind of calls her a derogatory name for it. But for example, it's a bit harder to get around in Shiz. No boy wants to ask her to the ballroom. The guy that does it kind of out of pity to win favour with, not even kind of out of pity to win favour with Glinda. So there's that going on. There's obviously the animal subplot, which is much stronger in the film than it is in the theatre show. I think probably largely technological reasons. It's easier to do, and I don't want to get too essentialist on this. But it's interesting that they've cast Peter Dinklage as the voice of Dr. Dillerman, who's this kind of talking goat professor and kind of embodies this kind of animal struggle. So I think it's about the various victims of white, yes, but heteronormity, cisgenderedness. It is about the victims of normativity. In its various kind of rainbow form.
Yes. This is not. I'm going to kind of garble this, but yes, you're right. It is about normativity, but also I think it's about queerness, and queerness is often seen as queerness is often seen as a repository for non-normative identities. We lump things together as non-normative, but actually, what queerness is, it's about our interrogating our relationships to normativity. Yes. So it's not this dumping ground where we can lump all these different things that don't quite fit. It should be queer theory, queer studies. Yep. It's a way of thinking through, doing counter readings, but it's also about interrogating what our relationship to normativity is and what normativity is, and how normativity itself changes over time to both widen and broaden its net to maintain a politics of inclusion and exclusion. It keeps we include that, but it reminded me of what you were saying earlier, and I thought about it, and I thought this isn't the right time, but maybe it's the right time. It's that the relationship that queerness and normativity have to each other, and the former's interrogation of the latter. It's that there's an acceptable face of queerness, which is often that assimilationist model of, we gave you your marriage, we gave you your but queer people maybe don't want to get married and also maybe don't want to have children, but that's an acceptable version of queerness within a broader heteronormative set of forces. And so I feel like the film is a lot smarter in that sense, and maybe at the end of this podcast I'll feel differently about it, but I thought it's kind of too easy and too obvious to just think about, okay, this is about acceptability, what is acceptable and what is discriminated against, because you're right, there's lots and lots of people of colour in the film, and green is one of a number of colours that are sort of played within the film. The film is very colourful in the way that I think the wizard plays with the colour of the road. There's like this little gag about, so it's very visual, and the green is folded into part of the film's spectacle of colour, which is a nod to the technicolor of the 30s. But there's diversity in the casting, as you say. There's sort of discussions of disability, but there's a different way where, is it the characters in the film making these comments, or is it the film interrogating these things? Yes. And I feel like you're right, that the characters in the film don't openly critique. So they do with Elphaba. They absolutely they are talking about, and Michelle Yeoh's character says at the very, very end that their greenness is a manifestation essentially of her wickedness. So this is racism 101. This is the biological. There is something fundamentally wrong with people of a different colour. That's what the characters are saying.
But it's interesting. Michelle Yeoh's character doesn't actually believe that.
No,
she's using it as a tactic to convince the masses.
Yes.
You know, she thinks that this person's just being difficult.
But it's interesting that you're right. But then the character knows full well that any mention of colour is going to create a. That's the easiest way to. As there are many points in the film where I wrote, this is about groups of people needing other groups of people to point at, and even later on we have discussions of this is bigger than just words on a chalkboard. This is pointing. We need. I think a common enemy. We need and so it's interesting that the way that Michelle Yeoh's character does that is to lean immediately on colour, because that's, and we talked about this I think when we did Harry Potter, the third Harry Potter and the Dementors. It's that they're not the embodiment of blackness, but race is often where we go when we think of difference, because that's how it's wielded in the real world.
Sure. Well, I completely agree with you. I think it is a queer text. I mean, I think writing a story about the life and times of the Wicked Witch of the West, is a queering exercise, isn't it? Like, I would say, and I completely agree with everything you're saying. And I think in many ways the film, I would say there are two caveats. One is that we should keep in mind that this is obviously a adaptation of a Broadway musical that was pretty subversive for a Broadway musical, but we should probably let's emphasize both bits of that sentence, but both equally, right? There's only so much subversion one can do in a Broadway musical, and that's probably about as far as you can go. And then it's obviously adapting a novel that was pretty subversive for 1995, but we're now in 2024. So there's been a dilution of the bite of the rhetoric. Yeah. Well, I'd say that. Then it comes out in 2024, and we're about to get Trump re-elected, and maybe it's not that the story needs changing. The world's just changed a bit more nastily, so it can take its bite again.
I agree.
But yeah, I still think that has bite and value. But there are things where, like, I think if you were trying to, like, and and the second caveat I should have said is that I think some of this potential, we've ended on the most subversive bit of the story, which is defying gravity, fist in the air, no one can hold me back, unchained, off we go.
Yeah.
The second half does quite a lot of work to remove some of that unchainedness to Elphaba.
Yeah.
I think let's park it. But I think that's the debate to have.
But I think that's why, for me, the interesting thing about, I thought Ariana Grande.
Yes.
There's a broader question around, and I'll say it in terms of like opportunities that are given. I've never seen her act in anything. I don't know.
Well, she was started off as an actor in a kind of Nickelodeon, but she's not done anything.
No, this is her big Hollywood, and I thought she was fab in it. Yes. I must say, and
it's probably part of the box office success. Judging by
really
the
great.
Audience members, the demographic of some of the audience members. But I know what you mean. Like,
No, but she's but
I think she is great.
Yeah.
I think Cynthia
Erivo is much.
Yes, it's much better.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm not. Ariana Grande is great, but Ariana Grande is doing an impression of Kirsten Chenoweth, and a very good one, and it's really good. Like it's Michael Sheen, Tony Blair good. Like it's very, very good.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. Cynthia's doing something a bit different.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's the better performance.
Yeah. No, I agree. I thought, Ariana Grande, so for me, Ariana Grande opened up a discussion in the film about white privilege, and I think that's why Popular is the most interesting song.
Yes.
Because it reveals, as you said, about sort of normativity. It's about popularity, and her. Well, she'll never be as popular as me, and there's a real interrogation of that's where the smartness of the film comes. I think for me,
absolutely, and it's deranged.
Yeah,
like it reveals the derangedness of this kind of quest for popularity. Like,
but it does it through this interrogation, and again, so it is adopting the tropes of a white narrative. You have your big two racialized narratives in Hollywood. You have your magical Negro, and you have your white savior narrative. So your white savior narrative is what's in operation here. Ariana Grande even says to Elphaba, "You will be my project. You can assimilate, and you will start to." But whether or not the film again is that once removed, kind of using fantasy to comment on the ludicrousness of the way that white savior narratives work.
Yes.
By sort of really leaning into it and going, it's ridiculous. And as you say, it's deranged. Yes. I think it's a really good way of putting it. It's a deranged manifestation of that trope in these kinds of movies where white and black come together, and there's clearly I will course correct you, so you can be the good migrant or the good black character. That's how. But I think that's where the film is again at its smartest by using fantasy and the armory of digital effects to sort of go, this is kind of ludicrous.
Yes. No, absolutely. It's this kind of, and the song, like, and the melody, it's kind of like seductive, catchy, but also like it's about to fly off the handle at any minute, right? You know, when they kind of it just descends into like Lars and like angular choreography and like deranged is the word I used again, and I'll use it. Yeah. I think, and absolutely right. I think that is an extremely, and I think this speaks to where the musical I would. Even I have problems with some of the narrative. I have problems with some of it, but I think the musical, the song, the orchestration, the songs, the construction of songs, the leitmotifs that run throughout are brilliant. I think Stephen Schwartz has written, frankly, a far more complicated musical, just on a level of musicality, than he needed to make this thing pop. And that's still there in the film. Yeah.
No, I think there's lots we could say. I mean, we don't have to talk too much about the kind of racial politics, but Elphaba's hair, the sort of the way that she wears her hair versus the way that Ariana Grande is sort of whiter than white. The film is, again, like so many of these kinds of films, it's as much about whiteness as it is kind of blackness or non-whiteness. But I think, again, maybe that is where the interrogation of some of the limits of representation is coming in the film. But you're also right that a film being based on a play, being based on a novel, being based on a 30s, like I absolutely get the way in which certain people would go, where you're just reading all of this stuff into the film. And I'd say, well, first of all, the film makes this available quite explicitly. As you say, it's not that it's not doing that with the casting of Cynthia Erivo. It's acknowledging processes.
No, I think it's. I mean, it'd be interesting if someone had that view and wanted to articulate it. But I think it's. You know, I think you could. There's. You know, what this is a calculated attempt to read more into stuff. That, again, like Glinda, the character in The Wizard of Oz, is deranged. Like this kind of pink bubble that that's the representation. I mean, scholars have written this. Alexander Doty's amazing essay in the collection Flaming Classics does all this superbly. But it's like this is the vision of femininity in the film. This is the sole vision of clear femininity, and it's this deranged pink fairy that can't even move. That's in the source text. Now, I think you can read it in the source text. So does Alexander Doty, and does it superbly. But what this novel is, what this thing is like. That subtext. Let's just make it text.
Yeah, which is what I mean about that sort of relationship between style and substance. Like there's a real putting on the screen, which the musical and fantasy genres do particularly well. It's all there on the screen, and the style becomes the substance of the film. But it's just undercut with this interesting time that we're in now, where of course you'll get writers. There's an interesting article in The Guardian by Stuart Heritage that talks about the trigger warning at the beginning of the film and sort of and wokeism, and it's like almost written as a Mickey take of that kind of response to the film. I can't believe you would cut. I can accept somebody who's green. I will not accept somebody who's black playing green. I just will not. And the film, there is a brief moment in the film where you see Cynthia Erivo without makeup, very, very briefly. She sort of leans back in the film, and then you see her black skin, and then she leans forward. I can't remember the song exactly.
I missed that. Okay, interesting.
But it's a very subtle. But then it erases that, but it also doesn't. So again, maybe the film. This is what I have trouble with a lot of films like this. So Charlie's Angels is my big one. I'm like, this is either a terrible, terrible regressive film or the smartest film that ever lived.
It could be both.
It could be both. And I feel like maybe that's where the uneasiness of this film comes. Sometimes I think it doesn't necessarily undercut the thing. Same with something like Shrek. It's undercutting a formula that it absolutely relies on to be able to.
But this is popular. This is what maddens me about. It doesn't have to be either or. This is popular culture. For something to function as an artifact of popular culture, it has to be available for multiple competing readings. You know, and you could accuse the thing of cowardice for it because it doesn't make. It allows
cowardly, no heart.
Well, where he gets a cameo in it. I don't know if you saw that, but there's the bit with the lion where he lets the lion go.
Oh, that was a bit.
All scared, foregrounding.
Sure.
Anyway, what was I talking about? Yes, the critique you and I might level at this film is that it's possible not to read it that way. And it is possible not to read it in that way because it doesn't push it so far as to not make that reading available.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make the other reading available. Like, for those needing that or wanting that to be there, just as much as the others might need or want it to be the other way, they're both there simultaneously. That's popular, baby.
But again, as you know, as we all know, the culture wars relies on
us picking a side.
Yeah, us picking a side. Whereas the way that we have to move through the world and engage with texts like Wicked is often to hold two contradictory things in our hands at once and juggle those things. But as you say, the culture war doesn't like it. You have to be able to pick a side, and of course, a film like Wicked is open to the sides being picked by virtue of the stuff that we've discussed. Whereas part of what we're trying to do is not reconcile them or explain away either side or counter. Well, it's actually not very racist. Like, the point is that the film, and again, I'll go back to the point that I think the film is maybe got more going for it than I thought in terms of it's trying to juggle quite contradictory things at once and does it successfully, I would say.
Sure.
Not always successfully, but for the main does it really successfully and enjoyably.
We can talk about the central, relationship when we talk about queerness, but obviously the kind of the overt thing we need to talk about is the two witches, right? Yeah. And that this is a story of female a female to female relationship. Now, of course, because this is a Hollywood musical, what we get is a subplot where
you have to partner them off,
where they're all got partners, and it's all very heteronormative, right? Yeah. So that's there, right? And you could argue, and then people should argue, if they would like to argue this, that the film could do better with that. And I suspect if the source text was written now, it probably wouldn't have those characters in it. It probably would, whether it would go so far as to have them in a sexual relationship, I don't know. But it certainly probably would just leave it being a bit more liminal. It wouldn't feel so necessary to go, don't worry, they're straight. Don't worry. I mean, but this film does do that. But whilst doing that, it also completely sidelines that character. Although less so than in the original play. In the play, he's nothing, this Fierro character. He's literally, not interesting. He is the people that they marry at the end of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. It doesn't matter. In this, I think partly through the casting of this guy from Downton, who I don't know who he is, but he was very good. He was very charismatic. And I think partly to try and give that story some legitimacy, he has got a bit more of a kind of heftier role. But, the two, it... At the same time, that makes the relationship slightly more complicated because it isn't clear. Is it romantic? Is it sexual? Yeah. Is it just friends? But then that's still an important story to tell if it's just platonic. It becomes a liminal space where people can put into it where they wish to put into it.
No, I agree. I think the two leads in that sense play it very well, and they play it very affectionately between them. And there are some scenes where they are in love. I think they're looking at each other in love, and it's that's where the power of the finale of the film. So the power of the finale of the first half of the play,
and the second, and all of absolutely
is the fact that they sort of can't be together.
Yes,
because their roots are very, very kind of different. And that's quite sad. I think there is a sadness to as much as there is a triumphant.
Yes,
she's defying gravity and she's off and running, and she will not. She's through accepting limits, and she says, because the cold never bothered her anyway.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I've said this on a previous podcast. It's the other way around.
Yeah, I know it is.
Let it go is just this.
This is. They get on the Hogwarts Express. It's absolute to the School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. That's all fine, and the cold never bothered them anyway. Yeah. So no, you're absolutely right. The tail is wagging the dog here. It's not the other way around. So I absolutely get that. But there is the ending has it's just tinged with sadness because the euphoria of one short day when they get to the Emerald City and they're sort of experiencing all this stuff. It's quite clear, and this is sort of gestured to through Michelle Yeoh's character, who I can't remember the name of, Morrible.
I'm quickly Madden Morrible.
Morrible. She's trying to create this divide between them.
Michelle Yeoh very good in the movie, playing, I'm afraid, the Pierce Brosnan Mamma Mia role in that she cannot sing. And sorry, I love Michelle Yeoh. Tomorrow Never Dies is probably my favourite James Bond movie, and then all the other good movies she's made as well. But she can't sing. Luckily, she doesn't need to. But fine.
Yeah. Yes. She tries to split them up during the course of the. I have faith in you. I don't have faith in you. then when she says to Elphaba, "I have faith in you," you get that one shot of a very jealous Glinda sort of looking over. And so the film is hinting at this split, but then it sort of becomes sad that Defying Gravity is this euphoric moment for Elphaba at the same time. And even Glinda looks on sort of longingly. You can is there as supportive, but the film is also saying that this is a sad moment. The characters are happy, the film is sad. And again, maybe it's a good, Alex, maybe it's a good film.
It is a good film. Yeah. It is a good film. It is yes, I think, as I say, I think partially this is probably, maybe I should not see the second one, because if I were to adapt Wicked, I would just worry about the first half, because I think it's in the first half where all these really interesting, exciting things can be talked about with real gusto and enthusiasm, and then I think we will struggle if we do a second podcast unless they somehow pull it out of the bag. I find a lot of this dissipates in the second half. So I guess one of the things I love is that because they've split it into two, we've got a year for an interval where we can enjoy that energy before the kind of inevitable closing down comes. But for now, yes. Well, yes, we're running out of time, but I guess we've covered the main beats. What is there left to talk about that we really should talk about?
I suppose the musical numbers generally, the musical numbers themselves.
Popular, we've mentioned. The Wizard and I is really well staged. The director made In the Heights.
And
I don't know if you've seen that, but I love the.
Obviously not.
And it's basically a kind of open. Lots of similar kind of camera techniques used in that in terms of impossible long takes and things like that. So used very well in that. Other numbers we should mention. You've mentioned
One Short Day is
and that's kind of where it feels like it's most classical musical.
Yeah, like, over the head shots, your Busby Berkeley.
On the town.
Exactly, they're just off the boat, New York, here we
got the horse ride here, it's all very kind of, but then that captures something about the novel, which is that kind of, one of the things that Wizard of Oz is interesting for compared to other fantasy lands, is it's a celebration of urban space. You don't get that very often in kind of, 20th century fantasy novels. Usually that's the domain of sci-fi, but here we have this kind of magical city,
yes,
full of all mod cons and conveniences, and that's exciting.
Well, that lends itself to A Wonderful Place Where Magic is Real, because writers on entertainment and utopia, such as Richard Dyer, talk about there's the passed along song, and then there's the fact that music is in the air, and here. No sooner has the Hogwarts Express arrived at the Emerald City, everybody's singing and everybody's on the same page, and they know and so there's something in the air. Fantasy is in the air, music is in the air. So I love that number. I think it's staged really nicely. I love the way that the film uses green. I think in that sequence, the sort of it's really playing with colour, and I love that sequence. And we haven't really talked about the wizard.
Yeah, so we should talk about the wizard,
who isn't any relation to Elphaba. I think that's important. That's really important to flag.
But is Jeff Goldblum, who also can't sing, but that's all right.
Yes.
But yes, right. Yeah. So the wizard in this version is this kind of banality of evil figure, right? He doesn't mean harm necessarily, but he certainly doesn't mind if harm comes to others, as long as his position is protected, and he's this kind of ineffectual...
can't do anything.
Charlatan.
She says you
he's the vacuum by which we have to throw all these prejudices at to fill, right? You know, because the wizard can't do anything, we have to blame someone. Because the nation state can't make us wealthier, can't give us the public services we like, we have to blame
the animals. It's the animals. It's the green people.
So the wizard is a a nice representation of that. Yes, I think we'll get more of the wizard in the second act, but I thought so far so good in terms of Jeff Goldblum playing it villainly but charismatic at the same time.
If you put into AI, give me a scene in which Jeff Goldblum is a villain, you get the. I mean, he again. There's a lot of sort of. It's a bit telegraphed, but actually very, very nicely done. The whole sort of model that he's created of this world is, and putting himself in it and putting Elphaba in it, and the idea of stage. The film is staged very well. You get the sort of revelation that Morrible is essentially his right-hand woman, and these two have been demonising the animals. I mean, I did find that the transformation of the monkeys into flying monkeys
horrific, isn't
was
it?
absolutely horrific.
It was, yeah. No,
Absolutely
a friend the other day asked whether they should take their kid to see it, and I said the only thing I could suddenly think of, just in terms of was that bit. That's pretty body horror, isn't it?
They're in pain. She says, Glinda says, the Elphaba says they're in pain, and then all the feathers flying and the. Yeah, so it staged really nice, and actually I felt that it worked. I don't know about you, I felt that it worked as a standalone film, mainly because of because it's obviously taking the first half of the play.
Yeah.
So it feels like, I absolutely get what's happened. I get all the stuff that's been established, and I'm sort of eager to see the second one. Having said 50 odd minutes ago that I won't want to see it again. I won't necessarily want to see this one again, but I bet you I think I will. I think I will.
Yeah,
because I think it's smart.
I think my only critique of it, from a position of adapting, is this is longer than the play.
Oh my goodness me, that is a critique of the film.
Well, in terms of duration, it wasn't for me. I was kind of happy. I was all right. I was enjoying myself. But I cannot fill that gap in terms of what they've added. You know, like I can't think of they really embellished that relationship, or they really added an extra subplot involving, like
this school stuff. It's all the
but all that stuff I can remember being in that. So I guess I'm saying that I don't. What did you use that time to do? I'm not complaining too much because I didn't get bored. I was enjoying it. It felt, other than my bladder, I was perfectly happy. But it is long, and I'm not quite sure what they've done with that time. So for example, like the sister relationship. Mm-hmm. There's no other than one scene right at the beginning. There's no other scenes with that character. They kind of smile at each other from a distance occasionally.
In the film, you mean?
Yeah, in the film. Yeah.
Okay.
And you would have thought that would have been something you could have embellished with an extra hour's worth of running time. Like maybe 2 scenes where they still seem to be friends at shiz.
But where would the heteronormative relationship come? You said that in the play that the Fiyero is.
It's pretty sidelined.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not exactly.
He's just
not
wet.
Exactly massive.
He's just wet in the play. And
he's not
a bit
massive
more
in this film.
No.
But there is more of him, and they give him.
There's more of him. They try to give that relationship more authenticity, and I would wonder if it might have been smarter to give it even less authenticity, and acknowledge this kind of the false heterosexual romance kind of element of it.
Yeah,
right?
There's lots of defense against the dark arts scenes of sort of training and magic and adjustment to a new.
And I think the defying gravity number is a lot longer. I mean, it's quite long in the
split, isn't it?
It's split like that in the play in the musical, but I think it's even longer in this. So we should probably finish on that. I mean, didn't sweep you off your feet?
No, it absolutely did sweep me off my feet because it's a brilliant song. Elphaba's got some pipes on her.
Yeah.
So I thought it's a brilliant song. It's sort of a little bit caught up, I felt, in the chaos of the film in terms of one of the things about the musical, having going back to where we started, is obviously you're sitting and watching performances, and you're not cutting into the space in the way that you can do with film, which is both an advantage and a disadvantage. So, and you get this a lot with musicals, actually, and I think we talked about this maybe on the Aladdin episode, the sort of Guy Ritchie not necessarily knowing how to stage a musical and therefore cutting into the wrong bits. If you got Fred Astaire, you see the whole thing. If you got Gene Kelly, you see the whole thing. You don't cut into the top half.
No,
it's watching Riverdance from the waist up.
Yes.
So there are bits in the film where I wanted to actually. I didn't want the cutting and the camera to move. I wanted to see and just enjoy the performance. But there's lots of reaction shots of Glinda.
It gets very super cinema-y there.
It does get very. There's a lot going on, and I felt. I mean,
I'd say not that this excuses it, but that's kind of. There's lots of stage tricks and crafts and cranks and people being lifted up and.
Yes, in the play.
So it's not like they're quietly sitting on the stage singing the song in the other version of it. But you're right. It gets Yeah, I kind of didn't mind that because I sort of thought, okay, let's go for it. She's got to fly now.
Is that? I can't remember if the hot air balloon almost escaping but not escaping is in the play.
Yes, I think it is, but someone will
the guards chasing
the guards.
All
that stuff's in there. Yeah.
So yes, satisfactory ending and defying gravity is the perfect end to the film.
Yeah,
and that's that. I think that's But I wanted to sort of listen to the song Because there's a few bits earlier on in the film with split screen and the kind of montage of the two sort of getting to know each other and
loathing sequence,
loathing each other, yes, before they become friends. And sometimes just not to cut.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes, it is just a tiny bit too worried about being canned theatre.
But that's where I think, and when we did The Greatest Showman,
yes,
which is that's also, when you even get this.
Well, a lot of them are these days, right? I mean, I can't think of a musical that isn't like that.
But the Greatest,
they're just obsessed with being told. But I think that maybe we're a little bit at fault here, and that maybe a little bit of canned theatre is not a bad thing.
No. Like, so I think that's one of the things I like about The Greatest Showman. It doesn't. You see the performances.
Oh right, I see. You're saying the opposite. Right,
no. But this film is also very much indebted to the kind of film that The Greatest Showman is, to the extent of having. This is me, the singer of This Is Me. She's in there. She's in
Chiara Skettle.
So it's clearly cut. It's a bit of, and I think these are positive things. I'm not being flippant when I say it's a bit of Harry Potter. It's a bit of the Wicked stage show. It's a bit of The Wizard of Oz. It's a bit of The Greatest Showman. It's a bit of Mamma Mia.
Sure.
But that's okay. Like, I think it's a spectacle in lots and lots of ways. But yes, what I liked about The Greatest Showman in terms of its presentation of the numbers, I wanted less cutting and more, let's just enjoy it. But I did enjoy it.
Yes.
So in a year's time, we may or may not do the second part.
I loved it. I worry if I loved it because it kept all the good bits of Wicked, and the bits that I find less good are still to come.
We also know The Wizard of Oz very well.
Yes.
And so did you feel that it was a good complement to The Wizard of Oz? Was it undoing some of the good work of the 30s film?
Well, it's deliberately undoing some of the good work of this. But I think I've hoped to stress in our conversation that a lot of that's, a lot of that was there in the original. Yeah. Probably not intentionally, but it was there, and lots of people found it, and that's one of the many reasons why people found that film had worth. That the ability to read The Wizard of Oz in a queer subversive space has been there since 1939 and has been enjoyed since 1939. So I don't necessarily see it as being kind of attacking the thing so much as kind of, well, like all good queer theory, kind of just like taking it through a new prism. A horse of a different colour, but still a horse. So I loved it, and I think I'm happy to sit with it for a year, and maybe we'll see how all the second part goes. I mean, I'm hoping to be blown off my feet all over again, but I would say thoroughly recommend if you haven't seen it yet. God, now I feel like we're like a review podcast. If you haven't seen it yet, do catch it. But I would. It's a good cinematic experience.
Yes, sure.
So that's been Wicked, and that's been us. We're going to be, back in the new year. So I hope you all had a nice Christmas break. We'll now run through till the summer, with lots and lots of interesting guests lined up.
Yes.
More on that to come soon. But otherwise, you can follow us on social media at Fananim Research, FANANIM Research. You can use that same handle, FANANIM Research at gmail.com to email us any feedback or comments or thoughts about what we've said.
Yep.
Tell me all the things I got wrong, because I'm pretty sure I needed to Google some of that stuff without saying it out loud. Classic episode. And otherwise, fantasy-animation.org.
Yep. Send us a blog if there are thoughts, things that we haven't clarified, want to expand, or that you would like to expand on. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. And otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Bye.